Hi, I'm Roxanne M. Lingnau with Washington State University. Today we're going to be discussing busting a psychology myth. Do only deeply depressed people commit suicide? There are many common myths in psychology regarding suicide. We know that suicide is a leading cause of death worldwide, so our myth we are exploring poses an important question. Do only deeply depressed people commit suicide? How can we truly understand one's psychological processes that influence their decision to take their life by suicide? Is it possible we can only associate depression as a risk factor? Why do people believe that only deeply depressed individuals commit suicide? When we are looking at studies regarding those who are suffering from depression, have suicidal ideations, or attempt to commit suicide, you will find that depression is prevalent in many of these cases. People who attempted to commit suicide are more vulnerable to depression than those who are non-suicidal. You'll find that a larger percentage of people who have suicidal ideations suffer from depression than those who actually die by suicide. When we spend more time being depressed or experience more episodes, it may be a risk factor for a non-fatal and fatal suicidal behavior. Having major depression does impose a risk factor on someone. Therefore, most people believe this is fact of suicide and not a myth. Alternative hypothesis. Those who suffer from deep depression are more likely to have suicidal ideations or episodes of self-harm rather than committing suicide. Depression is more common in non-fatal self-harm than it is in suicide. It's hard to pinpoint an exact reason why people commit suicide. There is no universal face to suicide in that there are many factors to who and why. It depends on several elements and how they're affecting that person individually. Someone in a hard situation where they have become hopeless and they aren't usually depressed commit suicide. Anyone can have these moments, not just those who suffer from depression. The evidence to bust the myth. Most people that commit suicide do not fit the criteria for being deeply depressed, in contrast to those who experience suicidal ideation. Research shows that finding a simple reason why someone commits suicide is not an easy task. It can be different for each person depending on their culture, age, sex, ethnicity. Suicidal behavior has different origins, and there are no universal warning signs. Only half of those who commit suicide have disclosed their thoughts or behaviors to someone before doing so. The truth. It is incorrect to say that someone committed suicide because they are a deeply depressed person. We must remember that suicide can happen in any family to anyone given the correct interplay of biological, economical, psychological, environmental, and social factors. When we struggle with these burdens, we can become hopeless. And this can happen to anyone at any time without any warning. Suicide drastically impacts society with the cost of life, and it can happen to the usually happy and stable person too. And why busting this myth matters. It is important to remember that only people who are deeply depressed commit suicide is a complete myth. And forgetting this enables us to miss other warning signs from those who are ready to commit suicide, have the means and the motivation to do so. Debunking this myth may enhance the likelihood of family and friends to ask questions. Those going through a hard time that may seem okay can still have suicidal thoughts and plans. Most completed suicides are those who are happy people in a moment of lost hope, or who never really experience deep depression regularly, but rather a loss or a traumatic event at that moment. In closing, that completes our overview of just one common belief of a psychological myth that many believe to be true. I hope this helps your understanding and education on suicide and suicide prevention. Remember that suicide can happen to anyone at any time. Don't be afraid to ask questions and check on those who we know are experiencing a crisis. So I think it's really important that we just know it can happen to anyone. It doesn't have to be someone who looks like the saddest person in the room. It doesn't have to be the person we know as who is always depressed. It can be me, it can be you, it can be your instructor. It could be someone very close to you who is generally your support. So keep an open mind to that there's very much importance to busting these psychology myths. And here are the sources of where we got all of our information from. And some more sources. All right, thank you. I hope you enjoyed the slide.